Lecture from the Fifth Gospel, given by Samael Aun Weor in Xochimilco Park in Mexico City. It is necessary to learn to not create problems in life. It is preferable, rather, to go out into the countryside to carry out a life that is in harmony with the infinite. Problems are nothing more than mental forms created by the mind. What is a problem? It is a mental form with two poles, one positive and the other negative. These forms are sustained by the mind and stop existing when the mind stops sustaining them. What is it that we must do? Resolve problems? No, that is not what we need. Then what? What is needed to dissolve them? How can they be dissolved? Simply by forgetting them. When one has a preoccupation, go out for a bit into the countryside and try to enter into harmony with things, with everything that one is, with everything that has been, and with everything that will be. To forget problems is basic. You will tell me that it is impossible to forget problems, but yes, it is possible. When one wants to forget them, the only thing one has to do is put to work any of the other centers of the organic machine. Remember that the human organism has 5 very important centers or cylinders. First, the intellectual center, located in the brain. Second, the emotional center, which is naturally located in the solar plexus and sympathetic nervous centers. Third, the motor center, found in the upper part of the dorsal spine. Fourth, the instinctive center, located in the lower part of the dorsal spine. And fifth, the sexual center, obviously found in the sex. These 5 centers are basic and indispensable, and it is necessary to learn to manage them. Let's synthesize a bit. Let's think solely about the intellectual center, or in other words, the merely intellectual man. Let's think about the emotional man, and let's also think about the motor instinctive sexual man. Thus, by synthesizing, I believe that we are going to understand, right? Now, in respect to the intellectual man, he is the one who creates problems of all kinds. If you have problems, I already said that they are resolved by forgetting them. That what is important is to not resolve them once and for all, but rather to dissolve them, and in order to do that it is necessary to forget them. Therefore, how to act? By putting the emotional center to work. That is interesting, because then the intellectual center rests, and in this way we forget the problem. And if we want to work with any other center, we could put into action the motor instinctive center, but then this would be something different. Here in the woods of Xochimilco, we have put the emotional and motor instinctive centers to work. We have put the emotional center to work through the exchange of impressions, of festivities, and we have put to work the motor instinctive by riding horses back and forth throughout this park which is so beautiful. Well then, I am giving you a key in order to dissolve problems, and this is very important, isn't it? If you argue with me that in this way one cannot resolve, for example, the payment of a bill to prevent us from being chased out of the house for not paying the rent or paying the debt, etc., I will tell you that the facts are the facts, and that they walk on their own, but that the problem is something different. The problem is something that the mind creates. When one wants to dissolve it, the problem stops existing for the person. People are afraid to resolve a problem. They are afraid to forget it, and that is very serious. They think, for example, if I do not pay the rent, they will kick me out. I have to leave there, and where will I go? Here comes the fear. First of all, one has to learn to not be afraid. That is the most important, to not be afraid. When the fear ends, life holds for us many pleasant surprises. Sometimes what seems impossible to solve becomes solvable. What seems like a very difficult problem becomes easier than drinking a glass of water. So preoccupation turns out to be excessive, right? Preoccupation harms the mind. Preoccupation makes the mind embottled in the problem. It is clear that the problem, with its two poles, positive and negative, which is nothing other than a mental form, creates a conflict within, and then comes the preoccupation that harms the mind and also harms the brain. To learn to live from instant to instant, from moment to moment, is what I recommend to you. To learn to live without preoccupations of any kind, without forming problems. When one learns to live from second to second, from instant to instant, without projecting oneself to the future and without the painful weight of the past, he sees life from another angle, he sees it in a different way, he sees it very differently. Practice it, take my advice. It occurred to me to talk to you about this in this forest in Xochimilco, due to the fact that I see many happy people, some going and others coming, riding horses under beneath these groves. The poor people come to flee from the problems that they themselves have truly created, but as much as they flee, if they do not forget them, the problems will continue existing. So then, that is the advice that I give you. Never feel fear for anything. Now, with this, I do not mean to say that you are not to do anything, that you should not work, that there is no need to acquire money in order to subsist or to pay the debts, etc. It is necessary to do all of this, but without creating problems in the mind. Learn to manage the three brains, the intellectual, the emotional, the motor, and you will see how things change. If there is an emotional preoccupation, change centers, put the motor instinctive center to work, to go out for a walk, ride a horse, walk, no matter how much it may be, but do something different, and you will see that you will not drain your vitality. The physical body will marvelously be rejuvenated, etc. That, then, is the advice I give you. In Asia, there is a very interesting Buddhist monastery. The monks there live 400 or 500 years because they know how to manage the intellectual brain, the emotional brain, and the motor brain. When the intellectual brain tires, they use the emotional brain. When the emotional brain tires, they use the motor brain, and in that way they keep the energy. They do not waste their vital values. There are those who believe that when one comes to the world, it is because they were supposed to be born on that date and specific hour. Well, about that I have nothing to discuss, but in addition, they think that one is to die on a specific date and at a specific age, and yes, that is something arguable. What happens is that the lords of karma give a specific capital of vital values, which are deposited in the intellectual, emotional, and motor brains. If one wastes any of them, he dies very rapidly, but if one conserves their values, he can live up to 90 or 100 years old and even more. So what one has to do is to learn to manage the three brains. Understood? Comprehend why I speak to you about the intellectual man, the emotional man, and the motor instinctive man. Learn then to manage the three brains with perfect balance, and you will see that you can conserve your vital values and live a long life. This is similar to the man goes travelling with a specific amount of money. If he wastes the money, he will not reach the end of the journey, but if he conserves it, he will not only reach the end, but he will also have the resources to pay for a magnificent hotel and to return home tranquilly. Thus, I repeat, learn how to manage the three brains. Have you understood me? One always keeps dying in parts. Pay attention that President Roosevelt, for example, began to die when he contracted paralysis. That's to say, the paralysis of his motor brain was the beginning that produced his death over the long run. And about others, there are those who die because of the intellectual brain. They abuse the intellect so much. They have so many preoccupations that they waste the values that are in the brain, and that's where it begins, until they finally die. There are also others, like movie actors, who abuse the emotional brain. That's where it begins, until in the end their heart is affected and they die. This is the way the humanity is. Do not follow that path. Learn to manage the three brains with perfect equilibrium. Do not squander the vital values, and you will reach old age